Does economic freedom require gender equality? I am an entrepreneur who has spent the last 10 years investing and building businesses across the African continent. I have spent the last 3 years traversing the nooks and crannies of my continent, visiting 43 African countries. In my travels, I have met over 600 entrepreneurs, including many young men and women who are taking charge of their destinies and changing their lives and the lives of their communities. I interviewed all these people for a book I'm writing on young entrepreneurs across Africa. Our story as Africans is complicated and complex. I grew up in Accra and lived there until I was 16. I had this tradition with my father. In the mornings on the way to school, he would buy newspapers and magazines from the hawkers on the street. My favorite was The Economist. I had to read it very quickly whilst we were in traffic. At age 13, it did not win me any cool points among the girls, but it expanded my intellectual horizons. I remember vividly the day this edition came out. It was the year 2000. I remember the cover. It was pitch black with a man holding a grenade launcher and the 3 words that will forever haunt me: the hopeless continent. I asked my father, "Papa, why do they think we are hopeless?" In a dramatic reversal 11 years later, the same magazine, The Economist, forced to recognize the economic growth of Africa with 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, released a new cover, Africa Rising. The recent reversal of fortunes and economic surge of the region has been uplifting for the continent as a whole, and for me as an African, whose childhood was mired in tropes of poverty and darkness and magazine covers rendering us hopeless. However, Africa's rising is also complicated by the reality of persistent poverty and income inequality. While I'm proud that 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa, it's alarming that we are home to 7 of the 10 most unequal countries in the world. We have economic growth, but we do not yet have economic freedom. What is economic freedom? For me, economic freedom for us in Africa is an Africa where most of the economy is owned and controlled by Africans. An economy that produces jobs for its youth. An economy that matches strong economic growth with broad-based shared economic prosperity. An economy that offers opportunities to everyone to succeed, regardless of your age, your tribe or ethnicity, which political party you're affiliated with, or your gender. By those metrics, we are not yet free. Throughout my travels and research, it became clear that our inequality was heavily gendered. A number of consistent themes come up in my interviews and conversations with female entrepreneurs about the challenges they face. Social acceptability, family responsibilities, poor access to market information, old boy networks, limited access to technology, the gap between policy and its implementation, and of course, access to finance, which remains one of the biggest challenges. When Mina Evans, a brilliant and creative Ghanaian designer with a growing and profitable business, needed expansion capital, the local banks would not lend to her until she produced land as collateral. Other lenders were charging as high as 120% in annual interest rates. and we know from research that women are often charged higher interest rates than men. And there continues to be the challenge of laws, regulations, and policies that hurt gender equality. Consider the case study of Abiba in Emily Chamley's ethnography of market traders in Ghana. Abiba is a Hausa woman and a street vendor. She speaks fluent Hausa and a little bit of English. She is 34 years old and the single mother of 2 beautiful children. Her daughter is 5 years old and her son is 3. She was married to the father of her daughter, but he abandoned them when the little girl turned 1. The father of her son offered to marry her, but she refused. She said, most women think that by getting married, their lives will be made easier, but the exact opposite is the real truth. She was tired of having to cook and clean up after her husband after a long day of trading. Abiba had a store, but it was demolished by the local government when it needed to build a new parking lot. To survive, she would have needed compensation, but the government didn't compensate her because she couldn't prove ownership. She had inherited the store from a cousin who had moved back to the north. Abiba was forced to join a group of women who saved together in Susu, a savings cooperative, and support each other. She recently lost her goods and her working capital due to fines imposed by the city council for illegally operating. A clear example of misguided policy. We need a legal and regulatory framework that supports and enables Abiba to thrive as an entrepreneur, not hold her back. Why is this important? As we think of economic freedom and models for our economic growth, I am reminded of research by Paul Collier, an economist here at Oxford University and the author of The Plundered Planet. Paul shared that in OECD countries, even after 200 years of intense extraction, the average square kilometer has $114,000 in known subsoil assets. In sub-Saharan Africa, the equivalent is $23,000 in known subsoil assets, suggesting a massive opportunity awaiting discovery. Thus, there is a compelling case to be made to focus on exploring and mining our resources, given this discrepancy. But a recent study revealed that from 2013 to 2015, $23 billion of gold was mined in Ghana, yet the government only received $1.7 billion, a mere 7% in total taxes and royalties. We are rich in natural resources, but we are not yet economically free. Our economic freedom may very well lie in another resource, one that we've neglected for too long. Our women, our female entrepreneurs. Globally, 30% of women in the non-agric labor force are self-employed in the informal sector. In Africa, that figure is 63%. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of female entrepreneurship, with more women starting businesses in Africa than anywhere else in the world. 41% of women are entrepreneurs in Nigeria, compared to 10% in the US and 5.7% in the UK. Women entrepreneurs actually outnumber male entrepreneurs in Ghana, Nigeria, and Zambia. Research estimates that advancing women's equality could potentially add $12 trillion to the global economy. $12 trillion. And it is reported that in emerging markets, women reinvest 90 cents of every additional dollar of income in their family's education, health, and nutrition, compared to 40 cents for men. 90 versus 40. I am not surprised by these findings, because growing up, my mother would do anything for our education. She even once sold her jewelry to buy me SAT prep books. And she never fails to remind me, if it wasn't for my jewelry, could you have made it to Harvard? But my mother is not an isolated case. One of my portfolio companies in Kenya, called Stawi, makes locally sourced, highly nutritious baby food. To better understand our consumers in Nairobi, we conducted a number of focus groups and consumer studies. The results were clear. Mothers, significantly more so than fathers, would spend their incremental income on better nutrition for their children and on education. Therefore, more money in the hands of women means better nutrition and better education for children. There was one woman I met and interviewed that I can never forget. As far as Côte d'Ivoire, I had heard about her. They said, you cannot go to Niger without meeting Jamila Masaudu. I was intrigued. Who is this woman whose reputation crosses boundaries? It took me several days to track her. I finally found her office. I knocked on the door. She was yelling orders on the phone and said, Western Union is next door. I explained that I needed to see her and not Western Union. After 10 minutes, she finished her phone call and agreed to be interviewed for a few hours. Jamila was born dirt poor. With little money for food, let alone school, she grew up in the streets. All her friends worked at night on the streets of Niamey, selling their bodies for a few dollars to put food on the table. When Jamila decided to sell water tied in plastic bags, her prostitute friends laughed at her foolishness. They were making enough to survive, and here was stubborn Jamila selling water for pennies and starving. They told her, Jamila, you are too poor to be self-righteous. Jamila remained defiant. Her first break came when someone gave her second-hand clothing to sell for a commission. She hustled and became the top seller of second-hand clothing in the city. With accumulated savings of $25, she started her first business venture at age 19, a laundry business. Her monthly rent was $35 at the time, and she struggled to make payments. Today, Jamila is one of the most successful self-made entrepreneurs in all of Niger. She owns the largest chain of dry cleaners, Jamila Pressing, restaurants, Jamila Restaurants, a clothing business, a real estate company, and many other interests. And the Western Union she was pointing me to is her business too. She's the largest Western Union agent in all of Niger. The office space where she struggled to pay $35 a month in rent, she now owns the whole building. She has employed many of her former prostitute friends who criticized her, and she's a major philanthropist supporting orphans and street children. As I walked out of her office, she hopped back on the phone, fielding orders. Jamila's example struck me, and I thought to myself, how many potential Jamilas are roaming the streets of Accra, Lomé, Lagos, Nairobi, Kinshasa? Gender equality is not just a pressing social and moral issue. I've looked at the data, I've looked at the numbers, I've done the field research, and it's clear to me that gender equality is also a critical economic issue. Given our demographics on the continent, with an expected 1 billion babies over the next 3 to 4 decades, I dare say we as Africans have an economic imperative to support and promote gender equality. Let's invest in supporting our Abibas to become Jamilas. Thank you.